Thank you all for coming and welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land which we gather, acknowledge these as Aboriginal lands, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement to the many First Nations peoples and cultures we represent here through this project. Um, a very warm welcome to Albert Yonathan Setyawan. Albert is an artist residing in Tokyo who grew up in Bandung. Uh, I'm not going to do a long introduction because I actually wanted to talk to Albert a little bit about it because I think it's an interesting story and really kind of feeds into the practice today. Um, but I thought we'd jump straight in and, firstly, and to mention that Albert's installation is on the ground floor of GOMA if you haven't seen it. It's a huge installation created in with slip cast ceramics, created with two different motifs repeated thousands of times to produce this enormous installation. Um, but you've had this long career, primarily working with clay, while you do make other artworks as well, and commonly now in the slip cast method. Could you tell us a little bit about what drew you to this focus on ceramics from early in your career and how it's kind of developed over time?
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for everyone to come here. And yeah, so I guess I'll just straightforward to answer the question. So I started studying in Bandung Institute of Technology, majoring in ceramics in 2002, 2003. I think the process was quite intuitive in the beginning because I honestly, I had no idea at the time. I mean, I've worked with clay before as a high school student, doing high school project, but not to the the whole scope of all the ceramics process, like where you can fire the clay and then you get to experiment with this glaze and all different kinds of techniques and stuff. So I wasn't aware anything about this thing called ceramic art, and not until on the last month of my of my year, on the first year where I was doing my bachelor degree, where I get to visit the ceramic studio and I discover this process, how people work with clay, how you can fire the clay, it change shapes and stuff. So it just kind of, I just fell in love with it. There's something light up, I think, in my mind, like, okay, this is what I need to do. Like, it just sort of makes sense at the time. Like, it's hard to explain. I didn't understand myself. I was kind of worried in the beginning because, like, I remember going to university was quite hard at the time for me because I've lost my parents, both of them, early on. My dad was when I was in high school. My mother was when I was when I was just entering ITB, so the first year. So I had to really, like, kind of work hard, try to get scholarship, try to get to university, and then just keep things going. And then so every decisions become really sensitive decisions where I really have to, kind of think really hard. That I don't want to make a bad choice or wrong choice or anything that I will regret later. So it was quite a kind of a daring choice as well. So because everyone was like suggesting the opposite, like, what are you doing in ceramic art? Like, go to painting, or go to printmaking studio. You make a better career or whatever. And everyone that I met was against me, against it, against my decisions going there. But I just sort of like, I don't care. I want this, and I kept through it. And that was it. I think I was kind of interested in the process. I think mainly. I mean, there's a lot to explore. I think it's just like, I mean, I remember, like, going to painting studio. I have a lot of friends in painting studio at the time. I hang out in the painting studio. It was just like painting. That's it. There's nothing much to learn. I'm sorry. I mean, I love
I've
painting.
never heard that before,
I
but
mean,
that's fine.
I love looking at paintings, and I enjoy them. But it's just, to me, it's just really look very boring because there's nothing much to learn when it comes to materials and techniques and all this various process of. Yeah. So that was it, I think.
Um, Good answer. And it's kind of an interesting story. You were studying in Bandung at ITB,
Yeah.
but you ended up studying. You wanted to study in Japan. You ended up studying there. But do you want to tell us that story?
Yeah, it was just a thing I think at the time for every students who were in the ceramic studio. Japan was kind of the main destinations if you wanna get like further study in ceramics. Like it was just like a thing. Like everyone was like, oh yeah, we read Japanese kind of ceramic magazine, and then we look at Japanese ceramic history. People are like some students were like mad about raku, Japanese raku. They were trying to do it in school. Just it was like a thing. So I decided to do that as well. But I thought like I want to be uh, like I want to go and I want to really do it, really extend my career. Like I wanted to kind of not just like go the easy way, because at the time it was kind of it was a little bit hard to get scholarship. There was a program from the Japanese Ministry of Educations, but only very limited seat for art student. I think I remember there was none before, and then my senior got one, and then she went there. And then after that, they keep, kind of trying to open up a seat for art students to go to Japan and study ceramics or study art. So yeah, it was that, and I try kind of okay. So I wanted to go to Japan. I keep, having that idea in my mind, and then as soon as I finished my study at ITB, I started learning Japanese, taking classes, and then everyone else, I think at the time, they tried to either go to Germany, or Netherlands, or US. So I think I was the only one who kind of wanted to go to Japan. So yeah, and then I started doing that, and then I arrived, and I just sort of I don't know. I think got used to the environment, to the just to everything, basically working condition and stuff. So I stay there for
And so that was in Kyoto.
first, yes, sorry, first in Kyoto. So I got to Kyoto in 2012, and I stayed there. I stayed there for 8 years until I finished my study. I got my master's twice actually, one in ITB, one in Kyoto, which is I don't know, like it was a bit unnecessary, but it was kind of like the whole process of going to PhD. So I got to finish my PhD in 2020, and then moved to Tokyo, and I've been living and working in Tokyo for 4 years now.
And the PhD was on the Indonesian artist Hendro Rianto.
Yes. Yeah.
Moved to Japan to do a PhD on an Indonesian artist. Another good story. But I actually thought, I've had the privilege of being able to see some of Hendro Rianto's work in the past, and I was completely fascinated. But I thought maybe it may be quite unfamiliar to some people here. Do you want to tell us just really briefly, not the whole PhD,
Okay.
but a little bit about Hendro Rianto and kind of your interests?
Okay, yeah, so Hendro Rianto was a ceramic artist based in Bandung. He was my former teacher in ITB. And the reason why I pick him is because, I mean, there's a few main reasons. First is that he has like a really interesting body of work in which the transition is really obvious from where he started his work as like very kind of modernist, formalist, sculptural traditions in ITB. There's a lot of that kind of tendency in the 80s, in the 90s. So he started his career from that era, and then he went on to kind of explore all the other aspect that wasn't familiar in ceramics. Like he started incorporating performance, for example, and then he began to use terracotta, which was kind of new. I think not a lot of artists were doing that at the time, especially the way he does it. He did it at the time, and then also the other thing is that he went to Japan for a year to study in Japan in the same university I was studying. So there was kind of okay. This is a nice, additions to why I want to write Hendrawan. First, I mean, on top of that, also there wasn't a lot of writings I think about him at the time, and then his work, especially his later work, the nature of the work is very ephemeral. Very, I mean, it was kind of scattered around, and nobody really cared. That's the thing about contemporary art. I think, like like he passed away in 2004. As soon as he passed away, I think people sort of still remember what he did before, and then there's some shows, exhibitions. But then 5 years pass, people forget. Like you don't remember who is Hendro Nianto anyway. Like what did he do? What did he do, and then what kind of work he did? So I tried to create this body of archive through the PhD. So that was the purpose.
So thank you. I'm turning to your practice now, and there's a few images of some previous installations. as well as the installation here of new work here, of course. But one thing that fascinates me about your work is ideas of labour and repetition, both physically in the process, but also conceptually. It's really interesting the ways you talk about it and think about it. Would you like to talk a little bit about the importance of labour first?
Yeah, I've always been interested in. I mean, it didn't come. I mean, this whole idea came through certain kind of process. It didn't come from the beginning. So I remember when I went to study ceramic, I was always interested in the handmade, like the labor, like the fact that you get to work something and make things happen. Like just by using your body, your hands, so that was quite fascinating to me. And then later on, when I as you began to work intensively, like year in year out with ceramics, I realized that it is not just like making an object. It's not just an object, right? I mean, like if you extend the process, the whole process, it becomes sort of like kind of a way for you to exist in the world. It's like an expression of just being in the world. I think it's part of that. Like the fact that we can make something, I think it's something that is very beautiful, but about the nature of human. I think, like we make tools. I mean, that's tools is the thing in ceramics. When you go into ceramics, the first thing that you talk about is tools. What tools do you use? Things like that. So tools are one of the examples how we can create something, we make something, and I think it's also representations of how our intelligence kind of grow and evolve over time. So I was always interested in that, like the kind of I want to do something like the kind of art that I want to do is the kind of that involves the body, because I think if we lose that, I think we lose connections to the world. I feel like that's kind of like it becomes more urgent after a while. I've been doing it for 15 years. I think after 15 years, I realized that this is my only connections to the world, especially against all this, kind of people talks about the AI now. Everything turns digital. I remember, I mean, I was children of the 90s. Right? I listened to cassette and make mixtapes and stuff like that. So music was very physical. I remember the time where music was physical, tapes and those kind of things. So and then just based on that experience, I think this is my connections to the world. Like I want to create something, and I call it art labor, because it's the labor. I think that's it's not just labor for the sake of creating something. Like you go to a factory, like I think in that context, labor is reduced and kind of dislocated or separated, uprooted from its own kind of context as a human being, as a human endeavor. So that what I want to do is like labor for me is a human endeavor. As a person, I can make some things. Why do you keep making, what do you do analog? Because I can. Because I can. I mean, we can create, of course you can delegate it to machine. I can do 3D printing. I mean, it's amazing now, all the technologies. But I mean, that's not the whole point. The point is like I exist and I want to make something because I can.
And in that way, it's also a form of resistance against
Yeah,
things
yeah.
as well. And I guess the other really, really central thing to the works is the symbolisms and the patterns. You've talked about how symbols function in different religions, in architectures and textiles, and how I think, I know you've spoken about how, a symbol doesn't have any meaning until on an object until it's repeated. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my relationship with, I mean, there's a lot of symbolism in the work. They quite often, I think, when people look at the work, they have this kind of, I mean, at least from what people tell me so far, is that there's some sort of religious associations, or it invokes some sort of like religious feeling to the from the symbols. I mean, which I think it's true to a certain degree. I think, but the context where I got to use to work on use the symbolism is that I think if it's a bit more complex, but I think I try to kind of simplify it. I grew up religious as a kid, uh, Christian family, church every week, twice a week sometimes, play music in the church. So I've become quite familiar with, at least on the kind of Christian religion symbolism, right? Like what you read in the Bible and all those things, and yeah, so like the symbols of the spirit, for example, like bird symbolism and stuff like that. So, and then also the fact that I was living in this kind of Muslim community. So a lot of people in my neighborhood was like Sundanese Muslim, and there's lots of stories as well. I think I heard from them, from locals, so which also kind of have a lot of influence. But so growing up religious, after a certain point, I become sort of kind of tired of religious activity. So I went out. I thought to myself like this is enough. I think this is enough for me. I want to do something else. I want to pursue art. So I ended up became sort of anti-religion in a way. I think I wouldn't say I attack religion, but I just sort of dismiss it. I think it's just a waste of time. And I became an atheist. And then so the way, and then through that process, I look at all the symbolism in a different way. In the beginning, I started as like, oh, I think to a certain point, I believe in the meaning of it. And then now I look at it like I don't really look at it like as like a participant of using the symbols to in the religious context, but as like a bit more critical. So I think there's this kind of I think symbols. A lot of symbols always change like from culture to culture. So what I like to do is that I take all these different symbolism and then try to merge them, mix them, and become idiosyncratic, and then create something really new that actually don't really refer to anything. So, but it's quite meaningless in a way and kind of empty, I think, to me. But then there's other functions like the fact that it exists there. It's not just. That's why I think most of the time when in artist talk, I usually start the conversations with making with this labor, because that's the point of the whole thing. Because a lot of the time throughout the process, the symbols kind of don't matter anymore, like what I make, because it's all about the making and the repetitions, and it's kind of like lost its meaning in the way.
And that repetition, it's just to point out, it's a slipcast method, and you do it all yourself, right? Um, make it all in each individual object, and then fire it all. Um, and also, I know in the past you've talked about how also the slipcast method for real ceramic artists, they kind of frown upon that as well.
Yes.
So it's also resisting that.
Yes, I think in Japan also. Yeah, I've been doing slip casting for 15 years. I mean, kind of reluctantly in the beginning because I hate plaster. I hated plaster, and I still do. I think now I still hate plaster. I try to minimize my, kind of the time that I use plaster, except when it's already in slip casting kind of process. I like to do it. But yeah, there's in Japan, and when I moved to Japan, I had no idea right before. And then when I moved to Japan and I sort of introduced my work to students and my teachers, there seems to be a tendency that slip casting, because of its industrial associations, it's being used in factories to kind of mass produce stuff. There's this kind of rejections. It's not very artistic, or it's not very unique. Because you can always repeat it anytime, and then it's associated with the factory. Because I thought it was interesting, so I took it. Because of that, I want to use it, because then to flip the expectations, that this thing that you can people think as, this is very factory, very mass produced, but then yes, it is mass produced, but I produce it myself, so it's kind of like the opposite of it, like to flip the expectation.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing I want to ask you, on a slightly different note, is how performance has come to function in the practice, and it kind of it does intersect with the objects themselves. Would you like to explain a little bit about? I don't think we've got any images.
Yeah,
of
no, I
performances,
think.
but
Yeah.
you want to explain a little bit about that, the aspect you introduce into the.
Okay. Yeah, I've done a little bit of performance, or I would say maybe like more performative installations. Like it's still centered around the installations, the object itself, but the idea was actually try to activate the objects, and I wanted to like every time, I think a lot of ceramics understand this. Like the whole process of ceramic making is stop when as soon as you take it out of the kiln, it's basically stop there, right? And then after that, nothing much happen. You just need to present it to the public, and that's it. You can do it in sorts of different way, right? So I was kind of I was really bothered by the idea that the fact that the objects just stop. Like I wanted to extend a little bit the life of the object. As I thought, maybe performance is a way, and learning from hand drawn how he approached performance, there was kind of like a really interesting kind of learning process also for me. And I began to, it sort of inspired me as well to, I think maybe I should do performance as well, because it was really inspiring to look at his performance. So I tried to do that but not in the way, like in the, in Bandung, there's I think quite a strong kind of a performance art activity at the time when I was studying. Tisna Sanjaya and his colleague also did a lot of performance. I wanted to do something different than that, because my approach to performance is not coming from like performance artist, but it comes from understanding of the object and what I want to do with the object, how I want to present the object, that the fact that I want the object to be active. So that was it. That was the main idea.
Yeah. More than a performance
Yes.
practice, it's actually adding something else
Yeah.
to the presentation of the
Yeah.
objects. Thank you, Albert. We've got a few minutes, so I'm really love to take some questions from the audience as well, for Albert. One over here. And then...
Hi, Albert.
Hello.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to extend the repetition question, which is there's so much precision and maths and order. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I was always interested in this idea of how, I don't know, I think it's centered around the body, right? So how can I use my body to measure things? I think, because the idea of tools is, there seems to be an understanding that tools is sort of like, at the earliest stage, the way we create tools to measure things, for example, it was always centered around the experience of the body. But then after a while, tools become quite developed. It's sort of separated from the body. It becomes a thing, kind of the machine that thinks for itself, right? They sort of like do the calculations, and your mind don't have to do anything. You just put, and then you do that, like calculator, for example. Abacus to calculator, right? It used to be really active, right? And then you use calculator. So what I wanted to do is like, how can I create something very mechanical and symmetrical and very precise? But it's not actually precise, because you can measure it and it's not always the same, like 9 centimeters, 9.5, 9.2, 9.3. But the idea that something can look really precise just using your body. It's sort of like in a way, in a nutshell, it's like, for example, how can I measure the size of this building just with my fingers, for example? I thought that's like kind of an interesting idea. I thought it could be like an interesting performance as well, like to measure things with just your hands, and then like that was the reason, I think, kind of these tensions between what is organic and mechanical, and then it all centered around the body. That everything it's here actually, it's in our body.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question.
Hi, thank you. It's been fascinating, but he's more fascinating. Given your attitude to painting,
Yeah.
I notice all the stills are a single colour. Do you use colour in any of your work? I don't know much about your work, so.
Very minimally. I try to.
Sorry, keep going. I'm just stopping and taking.
I try to. I think at the earliest stage, the first maybe 2 or 3 years of my practices, I was still using glaze. So in ceramic, the color comes from the glaze mostly, if not the clay. And it's kind of like it's part of it's as a result of experiment as well. So you can't really predict in the beginning. All you can do is you test the color, and then you get this kind of color, and then you have the recipe and stuff like that. So, but then after a while, I got really kind of tired of using the colors. I wanted, so my attention shifted from, okay, trying to achieve certain types of color, from what kind of color can I get from using this type of material, for example. So it's mainly based on the type of clay. So I began to reduce the use of glaze, eventually just stop all the way, like not using glaze at all, just the clay. So the color comes from the clay. So I've been using, I think, very minimally, like brown, red, reddish brown, black, or white sometimes, yeah.
Sorry, and the next bit is your discussion of tools. I keep thinking of that wonderful video installation upstairs where the artist is the tool in the machine. I'm just wondering your thoughts on that piece in relation to your engagement with tools in your craft.
Sorry, which one is it?
Oh, it's the one I think on the first floor.
Kavita. the
Okay.
videos along
Yeah.
the second floor.
Yes. Yeah, there's yeah. I think to a certain degree, it's sort of translated in a different way. Some of the ideas that I was thinking about, except I think for Kawita, there's this other like a different tones. I think to it, like a bit more political. Uh, but yeah, I think in the way she approached the the idea of the body, right? Like his personal, his own body, as a kind of a tool, right? In that way, I think it's interesting. Quite inspiring work.
And you also talked, really interestingly about the resonance your work
Yes.
you felt your work had with some of the other works.
Yes.
It's displayed with feather work, Uzbeki Suzani textiles, and how continuing those crafts is a similar kind of act of resistance as well. Yeah.
Yes, I very much inspire when it comes to creating patterns. I take a lot of inspirations from textile works. So when Tarun told me that, this really beautiful textile work is going to be next to the word, I was really happy because it resonates, because this is one of my source of inspirations, actually, honestly.
I said thank God.
And also, I think like the feather work is also beautiful and amazing, because to me, like there's a political aspect to it, even though it's not overtly political, but it's symbolically political also in the way that the idea of just persisting, doing this thing that's sort of dying. Like I think I was listening to this Melly doing her artist of today also earlier today. She was talking about it's a dying kind of art, like nobody's practicing feather works anymore. Well, if there's one that's still practicing it, then you keep the thing alive, and it's a form of resistance. I think that's also how I see making art labor, like the being kind of just grueling with materials, like you be there, you are there, you're dealing with the stuff, and then you make it yourself. I think the idea of make it yourself, the DIY aesthetic, I guess, I think it's liberating. It's also a form of kind of resistance, I think. I mean, at some point, I think I always think like we need to rebel against something, to kind of, I think being alive is partly rebelling against something. You need some form of rebellion, I think. I don't know in other way.
I think we get the gist of it. Thank you. We're just about out of time. I'd like to really thank Albert for being very generous, speaking about your work and the history of your practice. Just before a round of applause, just a reminder, we do have a few other programs on this afternoon. Please get to them, including over at the Queensland Art Gallery building in a few minutes and all throughout tomorrow. But if you could all please help me thank Albert. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.